All right, Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live on this, what is it, Wednesday? I am completely flustered. We're running late tonight. This is my fault. You can still yell at Matthew if you want, but it's really not his fault that we are running behind. I clearly need to take this very robust Baker Fairburn Hockey Show budget that we have and hire like an AV squad. I got to hire a bunch of kids from the high school, the old AV squad. You know, those kids that used to run in with the overhead projector or the TV and the VCR back in the day. Yeah, that's how old I am.
The production
Anyways,
crew in front of your house is not earning their salaries out there.
yeah, well, they're probably out there with some party favors. They're going to be probably up a little later than usual tonight. But at any rate, hello, that's Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic. I'm Kris Baker. Thanks, everyone, for hopping into the chat early. I wanted to be live about 15, 17 minutes ago. Again, that's my fault. I apologize. Sabres picking up a W tonight in Montreal by a 3-2 score, holding off Les Habitants. I said I was going to speak a little French tonight. That's the end of my French speaking right there. What do we got for goal scorers tonight? Jeff Skinner, Zemgus Girgensons was that a little deflection. Alex Tuck with the game winner. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. I don't have the soundbite ready. How dare me? Since I had to restart like 17 times, but I think it was 29 saves. Matthew, keep me honest here. I'm flying without a net. But
29 saves
nice
on 31 shots, and you don't have the soundbite ready, but now we need a new one because it's the dad's trip. And the dads read the lineup card, and Mr. Luukkonen gave a pretty good addition to the soundboard, I think. Connor Clifton's dad gave a little pep talk. Connor Clifton did not start, and then all the other dads of the starters announced the guys. And Henry Jokiharju's dad brings a pretty similar energy to his son when reading the lineup card, so that was pretty entertaining.
I love it. Is his dad as metal as his son?
I could see it. You know, it's hard to tell from just a brief clip, but it was fun. All the dads got into town. They were actually at the Ducks game, some of them. And then the whole crew was at practice, dads, mentors, a mix. But it was fitting that it started on Monday because Tage Thompson and Ryan Johnson's dads were coaching in that game. So for the Ducks.
That's
so
right.
It kind of worked out nicely that obviously they cannot join the trip, but they were a part of it in a way that the Sabres would have preferred they weren't. But anyways, a pretty good start to the dad's trip in Montreal with a 3-2 win.
So I guess when's the last time you and I were together, Matthew? I just want to do a quick recap to tee this up. But before you answer that question, if you could please, everyone, like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show wherever you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review, including Apple and Spotify. Kind of a variation of that little plug, but we always have to get that out of the way early. But your efforts in supporting the show help grow this thing. So we appreciate all the likes and reviews. What was it, Matthew? We did a pregame, I want to say last time we were together, a quick one. Oh yeah. It had to be during the week because it was Tuesday, wasn't it? Wasn't it a week ago Tuesday?
Yes,
I had the happy hour,
you were
and I was
supposed to travel for work, and you didn't travel for work.
Yeah, and I was a little buzzed.
Was that?
Show. And I'm not tonight.
I don't remember. I was at the arena.
No, that would have been the LA game.
2 episodes. All right. Yep, and they won
7-0. So yeah, last time we met was prior to the LA game. Sabres won 7-0. Then they kind of were on the other side of a shutout, a 4-0 loss. Their next game against Florida. They went into Minnesota. That was Saturday because that's the one where I texted you. I thought it was going to be 3-1 because the last couple of games that the Sabres and Wild played were 3-1 scores. We were close to getting a 3-1 score, but the Sabres won that one 3-2 in overtime. Then they lose to the Ducks, man. I guess my point is you lose to the Ducks, and that one still sticks with me. I don't get as excited beating Montreal. In the old days, you used to get all revved up when you beat Montreal. Like old days, like Adams Division days. Half of our chat probably doesn't even remember the Adams Division. I do. Those were fun days. But I guess a win's a win, right? But yeah, that Anaheim game, I mean, I don't know. Do we want to talk about that? I hate afternoon games, so I always blame it on that. But I'm
a big fan.
Are you excited?
Of games. I like that. Games. They are much better for my circadian rhythm and my sleep clock. So The Sabres were not sharp in that afternoon game, but they're starting to, I would say, even in the last, going back to that LA game, probably going back to the last time we spoke, most of these games they've played fairly well. They were completely outclassed by Florida, but Florida's playing like one of the best teams in hockey at the moment. They had a solid game against Minnesota. They're starting to show a little bit more, but as a few people have mentioned in the chat, it's too little, too late, right? You're
Yeah.
entered tonight 12 points out of a playoff spot, so they're 10 points out of a playoff spot as we speak right now, with the Red Wings having a game in hand on them and a whole bunch of teams in between them. It's going to take, it's not even referencing the Blues anymore, right? The miracle run the Blues made the one year to make the cup. Like, this would be even more, I think, of a miracle run to chase it at this point in the season, now pushing into late February.
And you're totally grasping at straws anyways, if that's like your model that you're trying to attain, is like to be the
Right.
St. Louis Blues, which was like Haley's Comet. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean the feeling that this is toast is definitely pretty much there. I was kind of, if we go back to when the calendar flipped into 2024, you're like, well, there's still a chance. I have to just go on this crazy run. But it's kind of funny. I don't know what show it was. I think it was even before you had to take your little break in December, when you're like, this team, or maybe it's the first one back. And you were just like, this team is like the most confusing, inconsistently consistent or consistently inconsistent team that there is. And that's still like, when you look at just like the recent results, that's the story of the season. That's what we're going to remember this season by, is the lack of consistency. There were some good moments early in the year when they beat good teams. And that's maybe why I'm just like, now I'm just like, okay, you lose to Anaheim. Like I'm still stuck on that more than I am any victory over a team like Montreal. But I guess here we are. You just mentioned that it's kind of setting in. They're far behind. It's pretty much a task that is just, they're not going to be able to achieve the task of getting that last wild card spot, right? Let's just kind of face it. And what are the takeaways going to be? Like, what positives are you going to be able to find in this season? I think you should search for them. You know what I mean? Hang your hat on something if you can, even though it's like disappointing after being so close last year. And this regression is just like crazy. Like, is it goaltending? Is there anything else? Like, what are you kind of thinking about right now? Or I guess let's just kind of talk about that for a second before we kind of get into what I think the chat wants to talk about. I'm just throwing that at you out of the blue because that's where my mind is automatically going. As soon as you bring up like there's not going to be playoffs, I'm like, all right, what are we going to kind of take away and kind of build from here?
Yeah, you mentioned the inconsistency, and I looked it up the other day because I was curious. There have been 108 three-game winning streaks in the NHL this season, and the Sabres
Mhm.
still do not have one. It would
It's
be
insane.
unbelievable to go the whole year without one in a league where it happens pretty frequently. But it is the funny thing about this Sabres season, going on 13 seasons without the playoffs. A fan base that has been more patient than any has had to be in this league. This is a league record 13-year playoff drought. This is the highest or the longest playoff drought in professional sports. Will soon pass the Jets once they hit 13 seasons here. The New York Football Jets, that is. But the weird thing about it is, at this stage, I do think there are positives, as disappointing as it is. If this season were happening in a different context, there would be some positives to take away. There would be things people were excited about. But I do understand that it's hard for some fans to be excited when the bar was set at playoffs where it should have been set, and they have
Yeah.
fallen well short because of some disappointing performances from key players. That's where the context makes it hard to look for positives. But Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's been fantastic since January 1st, has hardly had a bad game. You could argue the game against the Ducks wasn't his best, but all those goals happened on bad turnovers. It wasn't his best game, but I didn't blame him for too much, and he bounced back really well here against Montreal. You got JJ
Yeah,
Peterka leading the team in
and
goals.
And stop right there real quick on the Anaheim game, because Ev makes a good point here. Not sharp versus Anaheim. We destroyed them. Our only mistakes ended up in our goal. And that's right. That's what I'm kind of saying, though, when I say that. And in full disclosure, I was working during that game, but I remember I texted you and I said, I didn't see the entire game. Like, I wasn't watching it as close because I'm kind of managing a business. You know what I mean? But like, it looked like they played well. But like, when you go back and you watch the highlights of that game, those mistakes can't happen. And they paid the price for those. That's what I'm saying. So I appreciate you pointing that out, but a loss is a loss.
Well,
But
and I
thanks
will
for kind of
say,
going there in your comments, Matthew, also. Yeah.
Ev is right for sure. The reason I believe it was me who said they were not sharp on Monday, and the reason I described them as not sharp is because of the mistakes in the defensive zone and because they couldn't finish. Otherwise, yes, they absolutely outplayed Anaheim and deserved to win the game. They couldn't finish their scoring chances. They had no, finishing touch around the net wasn't there. John
Yeah.
Gibson played well, but I don't think he played so well that he, it wasn't a goalieing in the traditional sense. And the mistakes in their own end, untimely as they were, and so bad that they ended up, in the back of the net because they were, really ugly. Eric Johnson had a terrible play. He had another bad one tonight. He's not playing particularly well at a time when the Sabres need to really squeeze some trade value out of him. He's not doing them any favors there. But yeah, just the up and down, that's what they have to get figured out. Is you could look at positives in, little compartments for individual players all over the place. It's getting it all to fit together, both in roster construction and, game by game coaching and just getting these guys ready to play consistently. But there are positives. Zach Benson continues to play really well.
Yeah.
JJ Peterka leads the team in goals, or is right up there. I don't know if Skinner passed him.
Mm-hmm.
Luukkonen's playing great. So those things are good, but the focus now, I think, turns to these next 20 plus games are about identifying your big needs going into the offseason, but also evaluating. I view this as a really interesting evaluation time for the Sabres. Who's packing it in and who's trying to drag the team back into the fight? We know the playoffs are an unrealistic goal. They don't view it that way. They'll never view it that way until they're mathematically eliminated. That's just how hockey players operate. So who are the guys that
When do we start doing that math?
It's, well, I mean,
I
yeah,
haven't done
beyond
the
just
math.
probabilities, it's not that far off. I mean, they're,
Yeah.
what, 28
Well,
games left in the season, something like that, 26.
the reason listen, it was improper for me because we're going to have plenty of time for you to answer that question, for me to give my thoughts on that question. Like, what are we taking away? I think and it was unfair for me to just kind of throw that at you. But I think the reason that I did that was because of Luukkonen's play. Like right now, he's kind of the story, I think. And no one wants to hear me talk about positives right now, I don't think, even though it's coming off a win. And if there's ever a time to capitalize on that, this would probably be it. But Luukkonen, I'm really pleased with Luukkonen. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast. We don't need to beat the dead horse. But I think you're right, though. Who's packing it in? I think that's what we have to watch here in these next, whatever the balance of the schedule is. I think we already know what the needs are, because I think in tonight's game, even though the Sabres won, there's some things that I think we need to kind of critique a little bit. And it's some of the things that we've talked about, more so, I think, on my side of the mic than yours this season. And maybe that lack of sticking up for your teammates, the lack of toughness, the lack of, it's still hockey. And like that Benson play when Matheson hit him tonight, that pissed me off. I don't yell at my TV much. I yelled at my TV twice tonight. One was when they scored, actually, the Skinner goal. They had numbers. I was like, shoot the damn puck. I sounded like a guy up in the 300 level. Okay. I don't yell at my TV much anymore because I just wanted to sit and watch a game as a fan of the sport, not so much the Sabres. The other time I yelled at the TV tonight was basically kick his ass. Benson turned around well ahead of Matheson's decision point. He didn't need to make that hit. And I think that there's an element of team toughness coming together, and someone, if you're not going to do it, and like, you don't have to go and punch him in the face. The closest thing they did to any retribution might have been that Cousins hit that was on the goal, right before the goal.
Did Tuck hit him a couple shifts later?
I don't know.
There
If
was
he did, I don't recall it. I mean, Matheson was the guy that actually went down on the goal. That was kind of karma. Like, he fell on the shorthanded goal.
I think Tuck hit him a couple shifts later. Obviously, it wasn't it wasn't a dirty hit. It was, but he finished a check on it. I mean,
Great.
right. I mean, to be fair, I believe Mike Matheson is a college teammate of Alex Tuck. Is that right?
No, he would have been, I think, a little earlier. Maybe not. I mean, they're
No,
both.
yep. They were college teammates.
Was he? Were they?
I talked to Mike Matheson earlier this year
Oh
randomly.
yeah, because Tuck was. That's right. Tuck was like the Reinhardt draft. Yeah, man. Oh my God, they both been around for a while now.
Coincidentally,
sorry.
one of the nicer guys I've spoken to this year in around the league, Mike Matheson. But that was
Well, great. Nice guys still make shitty hits.
Right. It was a dirty hit, and it should have been a little bit. That's what made me laugh about Tuck finishing a hit on him. I believe it was Tuck. Somebody in the chat can correct me if I was wrong, but the college teammate Jordan Greenway steps in, but it felt like he didn't really get retribution on Matheson, right? He didn't really do much. He just kind of shoved him to the ground, and there wasn't much to it after that. He ended up.
It doesn't even have to be Matheson though. Like, go out and just hit the guys harder than you've been. Hit their star players. Just like, show some teeth. We haven't seen that enough from this team this year. Like they say after the game sometimes, we got to have more FU in our game and this and that. Play hard, be hard on pucks, all that stuff. But you can also be more authoritative with your hits and finishing hits. And I'm not trying to be a dinosaur, but it's still part of the game. And we've seen it, I think, a couple times this year. And it's bothered me. That's one of the things that I'm going to take away from this team.
Especially when it's Zach Benson, right? Like, you're 18-year-old. He's small, but he's also one of your most competitive players. It's not as if he's a soft 18-year-old. He plays hard and plays a tough game. That's the guy everybody in that room should want to stick up for, and should fire them up, especially considering Benson gets more garbage calls against him than anybody. I mean, he's gotten so many weird soft penalties, and
the refs have picked on him a few times this season.
And I just feel like there's plenty of reason to want to stick up for that guy. And that's sort of what I talk about when it comes to, maybe packing it in is the wrong phrase. I wouldn't expect anybody, especially guys that are playing for contracts and different things,
who's going to be competing right to the
packing
final period.
Yeah. Who's going to raise the bar higher than it's been for the rest of the season to this point, right? Who's going to take it to the next level and start to set a standard for next season and start to form, I think, those moments that you talk about, beyond just it being an effective way to play the game, right? Sticking up for your team and pushing back and having FU as the, as Cousins has said, Alex Tuck said it after one game recently. To me, beyond that, that's how you build a team, right? That's how you form these, beyond just everybody being happy to be in Buffalo. That's a start, building a positive culture and, a locker room that likes one another. But how about a locker room that fights for each other, and guys that want to go out there and hold themselves to a standard because the guy next to him is going to be pushing them harder? That's the part of this team that I feel like is lacking consistently. You're not seeing it all the time. They talk about sticking up for their coach, but how long did that last after the Columbus game? That they were playing for Donnie. How long did that really last? Because they haven't strung 3 games together. They've hit some other pretty brutal stretches of hockey where Donnie has talked about them not getting to the net. And I don't think this team has quit on Don Granato by any means. It's just, again, are they raising the bar? beyond the standard they've had this season, which is a bottom 10 team in the NHL.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's disappointing. I'm not gonna beat a dead horse. I think people know how I feel about that. I'm just sick and tired of seeing lack of a more authoritative response, I guess, if that's a way to put it. Um, you mentioned playing for Donnie. We should probably talk about it. It wasn't really you didn't really dive into the story about the saluting the fans thing, right?
No, not much. Because they saluted the fans after the Kings game. Because I sort of had my eye on it. I think maybe some of our chatters had mentioned it, or a few people on Twitter had mentioned it. And then
Yeah.
they saluted the fans after the Kings game. And they had previously spoken about, being pretty upset at the fans for the Fire Donnie stuff, like I hinted at, right? They wanted to
Yeah.
push back and they wanted to fight for Donnie and all that. Everything was for him. And I actually had a story in November as well where I could sense that I don't know what you would call it, the tension between the fan base and the players was brewing when they had a comeback win against the Penguins in November where they got booed off the ice after either the first or the second period. I think it was the second period. And unprompted, really, Dylan Cousins brought it up to me after the game. It was like, that pissed us off. You know, when they boo us, it really, makes us angry and all this stuff. To which I got a lot of responses like, "Oh, good, it works." Like, which it did, but clearly it's obviously reached a point, even insofar as, remember last season, all they would talk about was earning the fans back, talking about the building and how rowdy it was on some of those, good nights. There hasn't been any of that this year. And so, yeah, that story, like I said, I wasn't ready to pounce necessarily on the idea because they did salute after the Kings game. So I don't know exactly, you know, what the message they were trying to send or whether they're still trying to send it or what. They also had a weird stretch of home games where they weren't winning a lot of home games. Building was really empty for a few of them because of the postponement against Chicago, the snowstorm for the Sharks win on a Monday, the day of the Bills playoff game. So there were some weird circumstances that were making me want to give it a little bit more rope before I decided that they were intentionally doing anything. But it's kind of a weird thing in general, the saluting the fans. I don't know exactly when it started, how long it's been going on, how often they did it last season. It's not something I'm able to have in-depth analytics on to be able to say whether they're, really sticking it to the fans. But clearly something has developed where there's not the same cozy feeling between the players and the fans that existed even as recently as last year that I thought they were building some of that up. Um, Fan base has every reason to be pissed off. I think they have a lot more reasons to be pissed off than the salute. I think the salute should be pretty low on their reasons for being pissed off, but it's just one more thing for people that have dealt with too much over the
I
last
don't
dozen years.
I don't blame the fan. I'll never blame the fans for being displeased with the product, especially after the past decade plus. It's not the I don't think it's been cozy, the relationship in a while between the
It got
fans
a
and the
little
team.
cozy last year.
It
It
got
got a little
okay. It got okay. There were
it was improving. It was
yeah,
going in the right direction.
yeah. But again, in the full body of work, right? The Sabres like to look
Right.
at everything in the full body of work. Let's look at the past decade. There's been a lot of the fans have had to deal with a lot of nonsense, a lot of disappointment. I don't blame the fans for booing. I also don't blame the fans for sticking or the team for sticking together and not doing something that isn't genuine. I am really guilty of that. You know what I mean? Like sometimes in like business or like some kind of relationship or whatever, you have to almost like kiss someone's ass when you don't want to, and it's not genuine and it just feels not right. It's uncomfortable. And I'm not defending the Sabres players if they did indeed not salute the fans on purpose. Okay, I'm not defending it. I understand it if they did. It's just kind of a way to like galvanize them, try to take some energy from outside of the room, and just use something.
I had actually
And that's
mentioned,
a real thing. Getting booed is a real thing, right?
yeah.
But at the same time, though, if it happened multiple times, that's not what you do. That's not proper. It's not how you. Again, it's a business. They're in an entertainment business. It's not how you run a business. If they did it once, and then what I mean is not salute the fans once, you proved your point. And if you're management and you're paying attention, you make sure that it ends there, right? Like it's probably when did that chatter come up in the fellow media members? Was it around the Kings game? Was it after the
Well,
Kings game?
it
Do you
came
recall the
up
timeline?
so this is it started after the Columbus game that was when people were
Started
noticing it.
talking about it.
But
Okay.
I don't know if like the Toronto game they did it. Nobody seems to have a firm answer on that. It is tricky because we're always going down to the elevator as all that post game stuff is
So,
going on. But then as
you're
far
talking
as
about the Fire Donnie game, the 9-4 game in December. I'm going back and looking here, right?
that, I think was the genesis of the players being a little bit upset about.
Are you saying the next game then on the
But
December
again,
30th, I guess?
I was on
You were out,
leave.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I didn't see those home wins that followed. They only do it after wins anyways, and there haven't been a lot of those at home. And like I said, some of the crowds were small, and we're always rushing to the elevator after the game. So it's kind of a weird thing to prove how many times they haven't done it if they haven't done it, which made it a tricky story for me, which is why I was keeping an eye on it after the Kings game, and they did it because they had finally won at home. It had been a while. But I'm with you. I actually made this point at the beginning of the year before the season went south. They had a great crowd against the Rangers opening night. They lost. Still at this point, a team that people are excited about, an exciting young team that people think has a chance to make the playoffs. And the few games after that at home were pretty bad crowds. And they were terrible at home last season. It was one of the things that sunk their season. And the
You literally win one of those games at
right.
home.
So against
So
some bad
crazy.
teams. The psychology part of it that I didn't like was this idea. I think Alex Tuck said it to me at one point late in the season that he thought, or Kevin Adams or Don Granato, I think, said a version of the same thing where there was this worry that, if the building's full, you got to win so you don't lose those people, right? Like, got to make it worth it. Got to make every home game worth it for these people. Got to keep these people in the building, keep them locked in. And I made this point early in the season when the crowds weren't coming back maybe the way the team hoped. I think I said it to Jonah Bronstein, who sits next to me in the press box. I said, my message, if I were one of those players, privately behind closed doors, would be screw the fans. Like, who cares? If they don't want to show up, like, play so well that this community can't ignore you. That's the point you've reached as a franchise, right? Like, quit. If you're a player, you cannot be worrying about that. If anything, like you said, take something from outside and use it as fuel. Like, our own fan base doesn't believe in us. Let's go out and prove them wrong. And then, but they didn't do that. And then they're calling for your coach, which is what happens in professional sports. And sure, you want to come together as a team and you want to do all that. It just seems a little petty on both sides in some ways. It's like, is the salute that important? Probably not. But that should make it easy enough to do too, right? It's like they're booing your coach or they're calling for your coach's job because you're not playing well. Like, that's on the players. Just got embarrassed by the Columbus Blue Jackets at home. That's going to happen. So weird deal all around. And ultimately they just have to win, right? Nothing else is going to fix this. This fan base is rightfully out of patience. Like, I don't blame a single fan for being out of patience and getting mad about something like that because it's just the latest thing to get mad about. But the franchise can't do anything about it other than win at this point. No amount of little marketing or there's nothing left to sell besides winning. And
it's the psychology of this fan base got torched a decade ago. Let's not go down this rabbit hole. Okay. But the pressure and the fans' desire to win is just 10x what it normally would be because they were told to root for losses. And I'm going to leave it at that. And the team has to figure it out. That's all it is. Let's not go there because I was having a really good day.
But it is, like I said, I think in a different context this season for a different fan base, for a different, in a different market, it's disappointing, but it's not this like, crazy, stressful season that it's been for a lot of people because, like you said, when you go from what they were 10 years ago, trying to lose to get good, and then you never get good, all the 5 different ways that you try to build it, all these people want is to go back to what they had in 2009, 2010, 2011. Losing in the first round of the playoffs was fine. It was that losing in the first round of the playoffs. I think about it. I thought about it the other day because it was a day game. I was walking out. The sun was shining. The weather was pretty warm. And I thought, man, it'd be pretty cool to walk out here when the weather's nice. And there was a game played, right? Like a late April game. This would be, walk right by the plaza when I go to my car, and it's like, how far away is that? It doesn't feel super close, but with a couple moves, maybe they get there.
Things can happen quickly. They just haven't here. They have for other franchises. It was funny, I've never.
They just need to lose a little bit more. Guess one more high pick, just one more.
Get out of here with that. I'm not married, right? But I almost think that like the fans must feel like they're in a really bad marriage, that they've just tried everything to make it work. Everything, counseling, whatever, everything, and it just can't work. I think that's probably what Sabres fans feel like. And again, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about because I've never been married, but it's like trapped almost.
Well,
like,
yeah, they're. I don't know. Some people have already walked out. Some people are, went for a carton of milk and never came back. But,
Dad went to get a pack of smokes 10 years ago and never came back.
Like, I always think of Kyle Orton, and after the one season he played with the Bills, they were doing locker cleanout day, and we were waiting by his locker. He was the starting quarterback of that 2014 team. And he said, "Yeah, I'll be right back, guys. Just got to get to a meeting." He never came back. PR came back. They're like, "Yeah, Kyle Orton just retired." And he was gone off the premises. I'm sure some Sabres fans have pulled something similar, is retired from the sport. But like I said, you win and it all comes back, right? It's a pretty simple look at what the Bills have become. Now, different sport, different dynamics, but just look around the league at some of these markets, especially now compared to 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Our attention is divided in so many different ways, and there's so many different avenues for entertainment. If you're not winning, it's a big ask for people to spend their money on tickets and their time watching, and caring, frankly. But this, community, this fan base has shown that if you're a winning organization, and even frankly when you're not, you're going to get the support as long as you're, not at complete, embarrassment levels, which is what the Sabres have become this. And it's not necessarily the fault of this singular team, 2023, 2024 Buffalo Sabres, but I maintain that one of the best things Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane did when they took over the Buffalo Bills was they took the drought, right? I don't remember the exact wording, but I remember a general feeling from those guys that, like, yeah, that's our drought now. Bring it on. Like, that's ours. Brandon Beane was attracted to the job because of it. Because it was, can you imagine ending that drought? And too often, I feel like this Sabres team, it's like, well, that's not our drought. We weren't here for that whole part of this drought. We only have like a third of the drought or a quarter of the drought. Even though, you know, two of the three guys wearing letters, Zemgus Girgensons has been here almost for the entirety of the drought. Kyle Okposo is on year 8. That's more than 50% of the drought. And it's not any one individual's fault. Not saying that. I'm just saying taking ownership of it is one powerful way to get rid of it. And it was so powerful when the Bills ended it. Like the change, the shift that happened. Felt like you were covering a different team. 2014, 2015, 2016, when I was covering that team, I remember you'd go to another NFL practice. It's the same way I feel about the Sabres now when I go to a different building and it's like, oh, look, that's what an NHL team looks like. That's what,
You have to
it's
be
like
accountable for it, I think. Like,
you
you
just
can't
have
talk
to
about,
own
"Hey,
it.
we want this building to be like the old days." Like, you can't talk about it in the positive or if you're not gonna embrace the negative, right? I know, yeah, that's a good point actually about the contrast between Bill's front office being accountable and taking ownership of things that happened even when they weren't here. Like, that's
Right, you
why they're in the positions, was to end it, right?
Well, and what's
And
funny about it is Sean McDermott
that's
and
really
Brandon
interesting, man.
Beane,
Yeah.
they were total outsiders, right?
Yeah.
It really wasn't their drought in any conceivable way. While Kevin Adams was an assistant coach back in the day when the drought started and has been around the organization. He's been employed by the Pagulas for a long time. Donnie was an assistant coach before he became the head coach. I mentioned Okposo and Girgensons. Matt Ellis is behind the bench, and he was a player, here during the early part of it. So again, it's not one person's fault. It's not any of the, but it's just to say you have more reason to take ownership of it because for various stages, for your little role, there were parts of it. So it feels to me like until somebody steps up and does that, until it's like, or there's a little bit more of that type of organization wide accountability, that this persists, this continues, right? It's a lot of people, that comment on my stories or here in the chat ask us about, you know, how people are being held accountable. And I almost agree with Don Granato when, and he's like, he doesn't necessarily like punishing players because he believes, guys have to be accountable to themselves and they have to, but it just feels like this group hasn't learned that particular skill yet. And maybe that's immaturity, maybe it's age, all that. But that's where I feel like when we shift our conversation to what does this team need? How do they get better? I feel like it starts there. We've mentioned, like Boone Jenner, Scott Lawton, guys like this that are not just certain types of players on the ice, but certain types of leaders off of it that can. There just needs to be more of that. You can't just pluck Eric Johnson in and think it's fixed.
You think the players are running the show down there?
Well, not quite the way Jack Eichel was back in the day, but no, it doesn't feel like there's a. I don't know. It's a
If I'm crazy or way off, just tell me. Because I'm almost taking it back to that whole not saluting and things like that. Like, management would never go for that. A business wouldn't allow that to act that way to the paying customers.
It doesn't feel like anybody's necessarily running the
Okay.
show. I guess is what I would say. It's
All
like
right.
who is kind of spearheading things? Who is dragging people into the fight? Who is I don't know. Yeah,
Well, you mentioned Jenner and those guys like on the ice, right? But there's structure on the ice, which is lacking at times. There's structure off the ice, which could be lacking at times also. I think what we're kind of sussing out here is a need for leadership, better leadership. We've had the conversation in the past about who the next captain of the team is. They might not have one yet.
they
And you
might
could say
not.
Darlene is in line. They might not have one.
I've
And
thought
that's
about that.
part of the appeal that I have with like the names that we talked about the last time we were together, Jenner, Lawton. I like, and again, when I bring them up, it's kind of the whole package, more so Jenner. Now, again, pipe dream would be a very hot commodity. But like, that's the thing too. Like I was very confused by that whole phrasing in the Elliot Friedman report. I'm very confused. I'm still confused by it. I don't like the phrasing of like, we're looking for help now, even though it's really about it's established players. We're going to get them now for next year. Well, like Jenner's the only guy that I would probably go and get now for help next year. Other than that, wait, but let's not have that
And it
conversation again.
doesn't sound like they're trading him, by the way. So
No, they'd be nuts too. Plus, they have to figure out their front office. Who's even going to make the damn trade in Columbus?
right.
Right? Like,
Well,
so I mean,
the
that's
guy that got fired didn't want to trade him, and the interim doesn't want to trade him either. But you'd have to knock their
yeah.
socks off. This is a good
Well,
good comment by Ev here, by the way. I appreciate that he did the math, and
Ev, I'm
the
never going to
Sabres,
judge you. By the way, I love this guy. Yeah, go
especially
ahead.
not for doing math.
Yeah.
The Sabres best 23 players have played in 21% of the games since the drought began 13 years ago. For the youngest team in the league, that's actually a surprisingly high percentage of games that they've played in. And I think this is a good point as well. Is KeyBank Center a fun arena to go watch games in? Maybe that is a problem too. It's not a fun arena to go watch games in. But I still maintain that if you win, it fixes that, right? A crappy building all of a sudden feels like it has charm when you're a winning team, right?
Yeah.
These old crappy it goes from being a crappy arena and then people start calling it a barn instead, right? And it's cool and it's got mystique. And there's none of that because
People
for the
like dive bars. Yeah.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
And you win and it takes care of all of that. You don't, you got to find other ways, and they haven't done that either. So on many different levels, it's been a disappointing organization to be a fan of for really 13 years, but it goes beyond that because I think people were getting pretty frustrated even before the drought began that they, couldn't win a playoff series. They haven't won a playoff series since what, 2007, which I believe is also the longest stretch in the NHL. That's a long time without a series win. So, yeah, it's not
2007. Wow. Okay. So sabresprospects.com, RIP. I mean, I still own it. I'm never there anymore, but that website, it seems like was forever ago. That didn't start until January 19th, 2008. Yeah, you might be right. What was that, Ottawa? What was the last series? I don't even know. I'm a bad Sabres historian these days. Let's do a hard segue because we're going to be revisiting this topic and similar flavored topics. We're going to have a lot of time to do it. We got a whole. It looks like the off season is going to be a little longer than maybe you and I had expected coming into the season. Let's just do a hard shift real quick. Let's take it back on the ice, or actually off the ice for a minute. Updates on, we know Samuelsson had his surgery. Power skated, right? And anything on Quinn? Because
Power's
I want to
getting
use
closer.
okay,
Nothing on
okay,
Quinn.
okay.
Quinn is still what? By the time frame, like late March, so he's probably at least a month away. I mean, last I saw Quinn, he was still on crutches and still had,
Okay.
something on his injured limb,
He's walking around in
lower
bubble
body
wrap.
limb.
Um,
Samuelsson is still in a sling, whatever it is, his season ending, anyways. But Power is the one that is closer to getting back, but not quite there. And Victor Olofsson is out with an illness that he is not on the trip at the moment.
okay.
So that is just another guy that there hadn't been, dealing into the lineup all that often anyways. But what I find interesting about it, and maybe this is you probably had somewhere else you wanted to go, but what springs to my mind is that the guys that are Victor Olofsson is an unrestricted free agent. Eric Johnson is an unrestricted free agent. Okposo and Gergenson's also on that list. Olofsson's sick, so you're not showcasing him. Playing Eric Johnson seems to be having a reverse effect on his value at this point with the way that he's
Yes.
playing the
Yeah.
last couple of games.
Unfortunately.
And
Yep.
then, you have Okposo and Gergensons that would potentially be attractive if, in Okposo's case, if he's willing to be traded. So that to me feels like what their deadline is going to boil down to. Those 4 players.
I don't think that the Eric Johnson performance, like, so not having power there. So yeah, we're going to get back because we're going to kind of back in now to the segue where I wanted to go with the whole Owen power thing. Okay. But I think not having power has exposed Johnson because you've had to play him. And I don't think it matters to his trade value because I think the appeal to Eric Johnson at the deadline is as a depth guy who's probably not going to play, not a black ace, but he's probably like a 7 or 8 when you can expand the playoff roster. And it's the same appeal that Buffalo had. It wasn't even all about on ice. It's about off ice and just having that guy around. I think that's his appeal. Of course you want him to play better, right? But where I was going just to check in on power was I think what's happened on the D hasn't gone how I expected in Power's absence. I thought it would be an opportunity for Ryan Johnson. And that hasn't really come to life there, right? But Yoki Haru seemingly has kind of elevated himself here and embraced the opportunity. I'm not hallucinating.
No, he's playing well, and he has some experience with Darlene, which I think has helped. It made it an easier decision for them to put him on that top pair and move other things around accordingly. It's given, Connor Clifton more of an opportunity. But really, I think Henry Jokiharju has been the main beneficiary here. And, when you're talking about evaluating for next season, he's a big one. He's an RFA. What
Mhm.
does that price tag look like? What are you thinking about there? Because I think top 4 defenseman is still one of their biggest needs on the roster. Not to say that Jokiharju is going to take on a bigger role next season, but you need to decide what to pay him, and you need to decide how aggressively you need to potentially upgrade from him. Not to say you need to remove him from the roster, but that maybe but he is handling himself pretty well, playing next to Rasmus Dahlin, and now in a spot where he's still a pretty young player. I feel like we've been, you know, I don't know if we're Henry Jokiharju apologists early in the season, but we were, we've been positive on Henry for, a good chunk of the season. And
He is what he is, and he's still young, but I think that I've been impressed with how he stepped up here late in the year in that role, kind of filling that gap with power on the mend. And the reason I bring it up again was maybe you could have expected it to or forecasted that, but I thought it would be I wanted it to be Ryan Johnson, not for personal reasons, because I think he's a good player. Just because I think his game just fits with what the Sabres want to be. But Cummings makes the comment, and that's kind of where I was going, was that I don't know if it's a rookie wall or if it's, the peaks and valleys of a young player going through his first professional season. I don't know, but it hasn't been Johnson. And that's kind of a little surprising, I guess. I'm happy to see Henry, and it does make the whole contract talk even more intriguing. Or what they're even gonna do. I mean, you can't really move them. Someone might want them though, you know what I mean? But it's like, they could, but you probably don't want to.
well, they now have a few interesting contract situations because Ukko Pekka is playing like a number 1 goalie, and Henry Jokiharju is playing, I would say, like a borderline top 4 defenseman. Like, he's playing well in that role. Now, small sample sizes, but still, those are going to be two of their most interesting. They have a lot of interesting contract situations this offseason. Those two and Middlestat are the big ones. And then they can also start to figure out what Paterka and Quinn might look like if they choose to go down that road as well. So Yoki Haru is probably earning himself some money here the way he's playing.
I
And
think so.
Luukkonen is certainly earning himself some money and forcing interesting decisions, difficult decisions about how much stock the Sabres will put into what they're showing here versus trying to aggressively upgrade, right?
Yeah.
And try to make this team better for next season when pressure is going to just continue to go up on these guys, I think. So we'll see. Positive signs from both of those guys for sure. Eric Johnson has not been going down the same road. Connor Clifton's had some ups and downs, but to see Henry Okiharu start to turn a corner, I also kind of like. I'd like to see Cal Clay get a little bit of a look. It's another guy that's still only 25 years old. I don't know that he's going to be an NHL regular necessarily in his career, but I'm not ruling it out. I think he's got some interesting ability.
He's in that like Bryson. You remember when like Ruedel was here, like that type of role? Not same player. I mean, similar. They're both mobile. That's what they kind of rely on. But yeah, maybe Clegg. I like him as that tweener depth, real solid AHL guy, and he can plug minutes when you need him to. I think that's what the Sabres would really ideally like Jeremy Davies to become at some point, also. But Clegg has definitely had a Davies. Coda has a comment here though, by the way, and I thought this was important. I want to talk about this and just real quick. And then talk about actually Coda for a minute. Back out that Columbus 9-4 shellacking that actually started the whole Fire Donnie movement. That got the players all pissed off and whatever. We've already talked about that. Yoki's a plus every month. I went and just looked, by the way. The Sabres are only at a -8 goal differential right now. That might be the most surprising stat. It seems like it's more, but it kind of shows you how well they've been playing lately. And a 7-0 game helps, by the way. Yeah, I knew. Yeah, got you.
They
Yeah, I beat you.
were
Good.
they were like -16, I think before that game or something. So
Coda's probably sitting here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, they are among the teams. You look at the teams around them. Montreal is -42. Ottawa is -11. Columbus is -44. Pittsburgh, one spot ahead of them, is +11, which is an outlier. But you have teams ahead of them in the standings, like Washington is -32. The Islanders are -22. So, and the Devils, who are, right on the verge of a playoff spot, are -6. So, not much better than the Sabres. And just shows you how much they've really cost themselves with some stupid nonsense here in the first 55, 56 games, because by a lot of metrics, 5-on-5 scoring is fine.
Gonna say get a power play, man. Yeah.
The power play, we've gone over the numbers. They're horrendous. This was interesting. If we're ready to segue to a different topic, is
let me talk about Coda real quick. Let me get Coda's plug in real quick, man. Can I do that? Coda's probably sitting there wondering what is that? What do I want to say about Coda? Coda, when we're done tonight, for those that are listening or in the chat now, don't leave now because we're still talking. But go, I think it was last episode or the episode before, Coda left a very thoughtful, well-written comment. I sent it to you, Matthew, on Middlestat in the comments section of one of our recent episodes. I wanted to call that out. Part of what makes this show awesome is like comments like that and the chat that we have live. But I wanted to get a plug in for that. If folks haven't read that, I thought it was really insightful. I thought it was well written, well thought out. And it just adds to the discussion we've been having seemingly since November 1 about Middlestat. So Coda, thanks for that comment. Thanks for all your chats. Always also wanted to plug that.
It was a great comment.
Man.
And it was in line with some of what you and I had talked about, and just, a discussion that will be an interesting one to have. I think in the off season, I don't think he goes anywhere at the deadline. That's my feeling right now, a couple weeks away from the deadline. But hey, maybe they get blown away. I just don't sense that that's a deal that's going to be easy to make before March 9th, right? Is the deadline March 8th, March 9th, the Friday, whatever it is of that week. But
They're going to go out and get Bob Corkum. It won't even feel like a deadline. You probably don't even know who Bob Corkum is. Sabres longtime fans will get that. Okay, go ahead, Matt. You wanted to say something.
I did. We were talking about how, their goal differential is not that bad. And in theory, they're, how all these things that they've done to themselves that have compounded this issue. The fact that they can't win 3 games in a row, the fact that they have one of the worst power plays in the NHL. Don Granato got, I would say, a little bit testier than usual on Monday after the game. I don't know if you watched his press conference after the game. It was, he pushed back a little bit. He was going on about them being in the middle of this process of learning to deal with this pressure and all the things that come along with that, and cited the fact that the areas they've targeted, they've improved. What they haven't improved, what has gone backwards is the scoring. And he thinks that will all come back eventually, was the quote that caught a bit of steam. But the thing I took a little bit of, a deeper dive in the story I wrote was, how much have they really improved in the areas they targeted? Because I think you don't want to be sitting here thinking that you've solved all of your issues when what it boiled down to was they essentially went from, 26th, 28th, 30th in some of these advanced defensive metrics, and they bumped up to like 19th, 20th, 21st. They went from one of the worst defensive teams in hockey to an average to below average defensive team.
But don't the raw numbers matter, by the way, more than the relative stats, like the rank? Like, I don't care about the rank because it's also some teams could be having a horrible season and you're going to move up if you stay the same.
There's that. But what also I think doesn't matter in the context of how good a defensive team you are necessarily is the raw goals against, because they're getting great goaltending, like outstanding goaltending from Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, which is inflating that, or deflating that goals against.
Goaltending will always nullify or
amplify your
your
defensive issues, which is what happened last season.
Yeah.
So I think there's some weird messaging there. How much credit do you get for going from the worst or one of the worst defensive teams in hockey to just an okay one? I don't think anybody. In fact, Kevin Adams even said, he was on with Schopp and the Bulldog last week, maybe the week before, and said, about their identity that, they're not scoring, so they're not really, a good offensive team, and they're not a good defensive team, was what he said. I believe he even said, we're obviously not a good defensive team. And so, he said, when you're caught in the middle like that, you're dead. And that's where they are, right? And so that's where, and the idea that the scoring will just come back, right, feels like hope. And hope is not a strategy, is it, Kris?
Mm-hmm. No.
It just feels like hoping it'll come back. It'll come
scary,
back,
actually.
And I think there's perhaps, and of course, on a Monday afternoon in February, Don Granato is not going to admit to any deep down fears that maybe Tage Thompson had his best season of his career last year. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. Well, but that's a real possibility with some of these offensive numbers that they had. So that is where I think the final bit of this season and the end of season post-mortem becomes interesting to me. How do they evaluate themselves, right? How do they explain what happened here? And how does that influence their action in the offseason? That's kind of all that matters. Because if they don't properly identify what went wrong, they're not going to be able to fix it. And I think they still need these 20 plus games to figure it out.
I want to figure out what's the role of the hockey strategy department and what's their 2023-2024 performance review going to look like? Because I'm sure it's not all just about the draft. What role are they playing in hockey strategy? What role did they play to the regression of the team? I think
maybe they need to turn their focus to the power play. Figure that out next, because
that's true. Actually, no, seriously though, you know what? Maybe it's not as bad as like maybe there's a massive overreaction going on from the casual fan. They know the team's not winning. They know they were close last year. Maybe it is just all the power play. But I think they've changed some things though also. Forechecking, breakouts, and by the way, you don't just have one set pattern. Like we're going to go every game. You have a game plan, and is hockey strategy helping with the pre-scouting? Like how it usually goes is like the assistants do all of the pre-scout work. But now you have these hockey strategy departments, and it's kind of a newer thing. And how are they all working? That's a big like blind spot that I don't know how they work in. I'm trying to figure that whole thing out. I brought it up to you. We chatted a little bit earlier this week, and I kind of brought it up. I'm just kind of curious, but I'm stuck on it to the point where it's probably I'm going to be annoying until I have an answer. Like, because that's a very broad term, right? But anyways, I don't want to get us off track, but anytime it comes up, like Renato's comments about, we've made improvements here, like where we wanted to get better, right? Wasn't that kind of the gist of what he was saying?
Areas they targeted,
areas they targeted. Okay. How did they target them? Hockey strategy? Did they help? I don't know. I want to figure that out, man.
Well, it's certainly relevant because that's how they're going to, however they targeted them, it's presumably how they'll target whatever they identify as the issues with this team. Power play being the most obvious, but scoring, finishing touch, all these things, getting to the net. I'm sure they can look at the same heat maps we look at. They can probably look at fancier ones than we can look at in terms of where these goals are coming from or where these players are not getting to on the ice on a consistent enough basis. So
the reason I'm stuck on the hockey strategy part of it, by the way, is like I'm not anti-analytics. Some people are, you know what I mean? I'm not. I think that the best application of those numbers is the pre-scouting. Not so much saying a player is good or bad. I put less of a focus on that. I think like how the team moves as a 5-man unit, because it's a team game, and like how you work that into the pre-scout to game plan for each game is where that matters. To me, that's hockey strategy. That's why I'm kind of stuck on the concept. And I want to say Sam Ventura's got like a pretty significant title in the organization.
He's a vice president, I believe.
He's a vice president of hockey strategy. I was trying to bring it up, but I just kept talking, so I didn't look. But I think that's a significant title. It's a title of influence, and it's in hockey operations.
Let's see.
But is it just player evaluation? Because like we know that they were very involved in the draft, but they're not rolling up under the scouting department. They have their own silo in that organization.
VP of Hockey Strategy and Research. They are under the hockey department on the website. When I interviewed Sam Ventura shortly after I got the job, he mentioned that when they first got there in their first year, probably 90% of their efforts went towards the draft, which I found interesting. But he also noted in that discussion that because 90% of the effort had gone toward the draft in that first year, they did not need to devote 90% of their effort in future years toward the draft. They built the models. The idea being those models will now, just kind of fascinating in and of itself. They'll never show you their proprietary models, but it's like That's a lot of time to spend building models. It's fascinating to think about what maybe those models do, and they've been a pretty good drafting team. Early signs are showing.
No,
But
they have been. They have been.
but
Yeah.
when you don't need to spend that much time on the draft, where does the extra bandwidth go? And when they hire more people, where does that extra bandwidth go? It's an interesting question, and it's one that I think it's going to continue to shape the future of this team as long as the staff is in place, because I think and it's probably encouraging that they're leaning into that stuff more and
Yeah.
emphasizing a little bit of that and trying to become sharper in some ways. But it does speak to I felt a little bit bad for Don Granato on Monday afternoon, in the sense that it's like, this is the guy that has to come up and talk 5 days a week, or however often it is, usually 5-ish, depending how often they play, answering the same questions. I mean, I'm sitting there wondering, how many different ways can I ask a version of, some of these same questions that we bring up and talk about, that the people in the comments are asking us about. And he's the guy that has to do it over and over and over again, when a lot of it doesn't necessarily fall at his feet. Some of it, of course, does, but a lot of what we're talking about here doesn't, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where sometimes I do feel badly for him, in the sense that it's like, he has to always be the one answering, even though, it's certainly not all on him. He may end up being the fall guy at some point, but that doesn't mean he's what's necessarily wrong. And maybe it's that simple. Maybe you switch out and get a more experienced coaching staff, and maybe things do change. I don't know. Certainly seems like it would be possible, but he doesn't have 100% of the blame here. We have a question in the chat about how many scouts the Sabres have.
They have a
1,
pretty full staff. I know it's
3,
addressed to
4.
you. They have a pretty good, they have a lot of amateur scouts. They have a guy, they're well staffed with guys that are out abroad. They have a Russian, a Czech that covers Slovakia, Czech. They have a Finnish scout, a Swedish scout. That's a lot of European guys. They've now crossed over because they do a lot of crossover in their amateur scouting. They have a lot of scouts out.
I count 14
On the
on the
amateur side,
masthead right
yeah,
now.
they have a lot that are out.
Counting the
Some of their
directors.
scouts, yes, right? Jeremiah Crow, Nightingale, Jerry on the amateur side. And then their crossover work's already happened for the most part on the amateur side. And a lot of their guys now also on the pro scouting side are going to be out. They've been all year, but they're really ramping it up on the college free agent side. So that's not a weakness of the organization by any means, Stephen. And I did see your post-Lent tequila, 100%. I saw your comment too, Stephen. I will collect on that. Well, we're going to make more bets. I think that Kris betting the chat is going to be a regular feature of this podcast. But yes, you counted 13. Now that's amateur and pro that you counted.
14.
Oh, 14.
They're all just listed as scouts other than directors. So,
and I would say relative to the league, that's pretty average. They're good there. I don't think scouting is really an issue. I think now it's about the type of player that they need to go and get. Like, if I look at the draft this year, we're going to talk about it a lot, but at a high level, you're going to go skill in the first round, but man, it's 2 through 7. There is a characteristic of player that you really got to get. Don't go out of your way to get them, but you got to kind of put them in your pool of guys that you think are going to be available in certain spots. Speed, attitude, grit, energy, man. You got to get more guys like Poltapov. You got to get more guys that go to the front of the net. I commented to you on the Monday game against the Ducks, that goal that Benson scored. He didn't leave the front of the net. More guys like that. You don't always need to address the draft, look at your top club team to determine what your draft strategy is going to be in terms of, I don't have any righties on the NHL roster, right? I'm going to go get some righties. And you don't do it that way. But I'm telling you right now, they don't have a lot of those guys in the prospect ranks either. You need more Poltapovs. You need more Wahlbergs. I want a little more attitude. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about that. But I'm surprised people aren't asking about it. Like when I tweet about prospects right now on X or whatever the hell we're calling it, I got people saying, I don't care about the prospects. I'm like, well, I do. So I'm going to keep tweeting about it, Heaven forbid a prospect account tweets about prospects. Anyways, let's
I'm
clear out the
eager for Paul
we're out.
Topov
Yeah.
to get over here.
Oh, dude, I'm excited
Personally.
about him. Listen, don't judge him by his numbers. He's got the right attitude, man. And he's just going to be he's going to be fun. He's going to be fun. It's just like when like when you close your eyes and you can like envision what Zach Benson's going to look like in 5 years when he's got man strength and he's got a little more stocky and maybe a little quicker. That's fun to think about.
That's why I say there's
Topov gets me
still
excited thinking about too.
I mean, if you think about it, if you started over, right? Cleared out the front office and the coaching staff and you'd probably have to clear out ownership too, right? If you just had a blinders on and showed this roster and prospect pool to hockey people, free agent coaches and executives, it'd be pretty attractive, wouldn't it? If you removed all the context of how sour things have been in the market, how the reputation of ownership or whatever in league circles, and the drought and all the mess. If you just took the roster and the prospect pool and all the picks, and a GM was getting, that's another thing. How much are you willing to spend on GMs and coaches and, different things like that? How much, that's why that question about scouts I wanted to answer, because I think that's relevant in terms of.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up if you didn't, so I'm glad that you caught
the areas where there's no salary cap, right? In coaching, scouting, all these things.
Oh, you're going to sound like Pagula. That was one of his comments when he bought the team. He's like, there's no salary cap on scouting. And
that's my point.
He's right.
So
he's right.
And so if you had all your pick of hockey people to come in and run it, it's a pretty attractive situation, and the right steady hand could steer it in the right direction. We'll see if Kevin Adams is that guy, because I think he's going to get a shot.
Let's clear out some chat. We're already an hour and 11 minutes in, and we started late.
This probably has to happen as well. Exorcism at KeyBank Center. There needs to be some, in addition to clearing everything else out, you would probably need to do that. I believe the phrase Tim Graham used in his column at the Buffalo News when it was time to do this with the Bills was that the Bills needed to fumigate their football operation. And it turned out that a few months later they pretty much did that. But
when I see exorcism, I immediately thought of Serrano, like want to sacrifice a chicken in Major League.
Yeah, basically something needs to be done. I was more so not saying that that's the route they're going down, but more so saying if you did that and just looked at the hockey part of it, it's still an attractive situation and still some reason to be optimistic. You just have to see through the fog of the drought to see it clearly sometimes.
There's a lot to be excited about in the prospect ranks, and I haven't done a prospect avenue in a little bit. It's been a while. I've had some other things going on. I am going to do one in the next couple of days, but little preview here. Savoy came back tonight. Savoy, I think people should be excited about Savoy. I know he was hurt again. He's got a goal tonight. They're finishing up their game. They started at 9, so they're going to be finishing up. But he's got a goal in his first game back. He came out for warm-ups on February. It was the 10th. Against Calgary, wasn't feeling right. They kept him off, but it wasn't a serious injury. They kept him out because they could. They want to get him healthy. If it was a playoff environment, he would have been playing all along. But part of the reason that he gets hurt is because of the way he plays. He goes crazy hard to the net, like it's fearless. So it's a double-edged sword, right? You might get some dings here and there, but that's the type of attitude that you want. And what did I just say about checking some of those boxes, like speed, attitude, maybe a little great. He's got elements to that. He certainly has a speed. He's got elements to some of the other things that I'm looking for too. He's not going to be a guy though that answers, when Matheson. That's the problem. Like going back to what I talked about earlier, he's not that. They don't have that.
He needs
in the prospect ranks, and that's part of what I'm saying.
And this is maybe a topic for an off-season podcast, but how in the world is Matt Savoy supposed to add muscle to his frame when he's playing like 100 and something hockey games?
You don't. It's hard to add master in the season. You work to like keep it instead of lose it, really, like with all the, you know what I mean?
Right, but even in the off season, he's got a month to put muscle on his frame before he's back. It's not easy to do.
Well, yeah, especially if you go on an extended run. Mats Lindgren, though, gained what, 11, 12 pounds of muscle in the offseason last year? And you see it. They can add in a short window, but I know what you're saying. There's validity there. It's just not
Would there
easy.
maybe be like, might it be smart? And I don't know, maybe this is a stupid thing to think, but kind of like the Amerks are doing with Kisakov, where or
Mhm.
had been doing anyways, where it's like, you know what, you're not going to play the next couple of weeks. You're going to lift weights, and kind of try to devise a program that way. Where now you're never going to convince Moose Jaw in the middle of their Memorial Cup run or their quest for the Memorial Cup to Matt Savoy needs to sit out for a few weeks so he can get a couple extra squats in. But it's one of the funny things to me. You hear it a million times on draft weekend. This guy just needs to add some muscle. And I'm like, yeah, when's he going to do that? When he's playing 110 games in
Yeah,
the
I know.
CHL? Like,
It's a multi-year process. They do play too many games in the CHL, but don't even get me started on that. We'll talk about that in July or something too. But no, let's clear the chat out. Let's clear the chat out and let's get out of here because we're already an hour 15, and
this is like a
people are gonna be
throwback. We had a couple of
sick of this.
shorter episodes for a few weeks. This is like a
I
throwback to our
know,
first
I know.
few.
Well, this is my fault though. So in full disclosure, Matthew wanted to get another win in because I was saying last time we were together, last couple of times we're going to do multiple times a week. That is the intent. I couldn't make it happen. It's on me, just like the late start tonight was on me. You wanted to go Saturday, and I was just like, dude, I need a break from just everything. And
And Monday
and I
you were
wasn't
working.
sleeping.
You
I
were
wasn't
working
sleep. Yeah,
like a
I was working.
I'm trying
I'm
to
a slave.
drag you into the fight. I'm trying to be
I,
the Boone Jenner of the podcast and drag you into the fight is what I'm
yes,
doing.
Matthew Kachuk Fairburn. Um, do you see anything in here that you want to throw up? It's a pretty lengthy chat.
We touched on this when we were doing an episode the
Oh,
night of the Bean Pot.
oh, this is a fun one.
I like
Yeah,
this. We're getting close to decision time. Blake asked, I think, Alex, do you think Alex Tuck can convince Luke Tuck to walk and come to us? He's gritty. He is gritty. He put
he is gritty.
I
He
like his
checks some of
game.
those boxes that I was just
He
saying.
does.
Yes.
And he's far along in his development. He's played 4 years at Boston University. He can become a free agent in August, so a situation to monitor for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a Montreal draft pick. Montreal has every reason to want to sign him, but part of the beauty of sticking around for 4 years is you get to decide to go wherever you want if you choose to take that route and deal with the, whatever vitriol may come your way, which is probably more when you're drafted by a place like Montreal than, uh, you know, maybe it would be easier if he was drafted by Anaheim, right? And he was just so far away, a division team. But Luke Tuck is, after he was drafted, said he likes to, play a little bit like Matthew Tkachuk or model his game after Matthew Tkachuk. Something tells me he wouldn't be afraid to piss off a division rival. It
I
strikes me
I
as
know
something he
Luke.
wants to do.
Yeah, I know Luke a little bit. He definitely has that attitude that you're going to be looking for sure. And hey, listen, the Sabres can't talk about it for tampering. We can. We certainly can.
Right.
And he would check some of those boxes that I was just describing and what the system needs. That would be that's an interesting one. I'm glad that comment came in.
And you know what? They
Um,
also need to find creative ways like that to add to their roster. Because as we've talked about before, not every free agent is going to want to come to Buffalo. A lot of your trade targets are going to have Buffalo on their no movement lists. So finding little ways like that, college free agency, to add to your roster and get stronger, it's going to be imperative for Kevin Adams to continue to get this thing going.
Free players are good players. That's a free player. Hey, real quick, I should probably just text you. I just got a text though. You got to put your one and done pick in. Okay. Anyways, yeah,
That's right. Somebody
there's your
texted you.
reminder.
I got an email
Yeah.
reminder.
Well, okay. Poppy texted me. Anyways, anything else in the chat here before we bounce out? I like that Luke Tuck one. We didn't talk about Krebs. And I did actually write it down. I had a couple things. What have you liked Krebs there up with what is it, Peterka and Benson. So the comment here from Neil, Krebs is third line center with Peterka and Benson. Is Benson is a Middlestad trade coming up? We've talked about that a lot. Sabres AGM is following Colorado around, and they were looking for a new third line center. You could comment on that. I think we both know where each other sits on the whole Middlestad thing. Let's talk about Krebs, though, the front end of that comment from Neil. You like him down the middle there with those two guys? What do you see in anything stand out to you?
I like the look of it so far.
Yeah.
I like the idea of it and giving it some run for sure.
Okay.
Because one of a few things needs to happen. To Neil's point, there's a lot of domino effects here with the Krebs thing. Don Granato said, whatever practice it was that they bumped him up, that they've never thought of him as a fourth liner as far as his NHL future. That was just the situation that he was in. And he was constantly reminding him of that behind the scenes, that he's not a fourth liner. They don't think he's a fourth liner. They need to find out how solid a third liner he is, because it does impact some other decisions. It could impact the Middlestat decision, how much you're willing to pay him. It could mean that, Krebs is a potential guy that you move. All those two things are big, but also just this guy was a key piece of the Jack Eichel trade. At some point, you have to see what you have. And in the role that he's had for most of the last 2 seasons, you don't really get to see what you have. You just get to see, the energy, the willingness to hit, and things like that. But you don't necessarily get to see the offensive skill in that fourth line role. So I'm excited to see how it evolves. I think the early returns have been pretty good. 3 players that all bring energy.
Yeah.
And
like
and a good amount of detail. I think the 3 of them, Peterka's some underrated detail to his game and his own end. And all 3 of those guys are a decent fit. I think they got a little too married to the kid line at times, right? The Quinn, Cousins, Peterka. And this allows them to look at some other combinations, because not sure anything should be really set in stone heading into next season.
Dan Meyer, Southtown superstar, writes Austin Matthews. Oh, dude, it's getting late. You can tell. Austin Matthews scored his 50th tonight, 36 goals since September 2nd. Wow, your thoughts? Love to see an American piling up the goals first and foremost. I don't care that he's playing in Toronto in this case. No, I mean, he's actually on a really quick pace, man. We have to go back and look and see like the years and map it out. He's going to be seriously in the history of the game, probably one of the more prolific goal scorers by the time he's done. Now let's bring it back, because he's not attainable for the Sabres. There's a player that shoots the puck like Austin Matthews in the draft. He's also an American, Cole Yzerman. I'm not saying that you're going to go and look for him, but he's going to be sliding down draft boards a little bit because of maybe skating concerns and things like that. But man, the release of that kid, if fans, as you start looking in the draft, pay attention to Cole Yzerman. He plays for the National Team Development Program. Watch the way this kid shoots the puck. That's my thought. I'll always bring it back to some kind of prospect. So there you go.
See, I thought your draft take on that was that it's proof that tanking works.
I'll never admit that.
Or that the Sabres just did it in the wrong year, because otherwise they'd have Austin Matthews.
No, they actually did it in the right year. They just the world didn't allow it to happen.
He is having an incredible season. He is so much fun to watch.
Yeah, he does some crazy things with the puck. Watch him in warmups, by the way. If you ever watch him, like when he'll get the puck on his blade and just like spin it around, I can't show it to you because I don't have a camera angle that allows me to.
Or a hockey
watch
stick,
his hands and his puck skills. Yeah, I do have one of Ville Lano's sticks about 15 feet from me, though. I use it to knock down icicles, and I'm actually getting more use out of it here than Ville Lano did. Cummings, 11:04. So I was about 20 minutes ago on a Wednesday night, sitting here drinking coffee, trying to figure out how to fix the Sabres. F my life. Is anyone with real authority still up drinking coffee? I don't have authority, but I was, believe it or not. And this is not how I finally got my sleep schedule right. And now I'm messing it up again.
I never drink coffee. Very rarely drink coffee when the clock switches to PM. Not even in the afternoon.
Sue Sliz, Sue's husband chatting, two types of coaches. Donnie appears to be a developmental coach where improving skills is more important than winning. A game coach's main goal is to win at all costs. 100%. We've kind of touched upon that a little bit, maybe in January when we started talking, when I was really frustrated and I was like, okay, because I never say that. I remember it. I was just like, I've reached the point where it's like, you got to make a move. That's where we started talking about Vancouver, the changes, the timing of the change that they made behind the bench last year, potentially being a critical piece to the success that they're having now. Let's not rehash that at an hour and 25 minutes in, but I wanted to put Sue's husband's chat up there through Sue's account because that's always a fun
I
dynamic.
like that that touch.
Yes.
He didn't want to just comment as Susan. He didn't want us
He
to
wanted to think he was Susan. Yeah.
he didn't want us to think we had a female listener of any kind. Or I don't know how many of those we have out there, period. Or I thought we were boosting our numbers in that demographic, but I guess not.
I'm just going to throw a couple randos up here before we end the night. Matthew Kachuk is hot. Of course, he's talking about not physically, but actually like the production is ridiculous. Yeah, and the timing is right. It's all about how you finish and go into the playoffs. And he's looking to be in a pretty good spot there on a really solid team. Campbell, well, yeah. So wait, Mitz is not a winger. He's everything. He's a forward. He plays both. But I don't know what that's in context of. That was 5 minutes ago. That chat came in at 11:22.
I think there was an argument happening about.
Oh, okay. My bad.
I don't think
I love it when the chat talks to each other. Just sometimes it's hard to figure out what's directed at us and what's directed at them. We need super chats. That's what we need, even if they're like 99 cents, because they stick out and every super chat will get read. That's what we need. I'm not trying to siphon money out of the people, but that would certainly help weed through it because they just have a different color in the chat. I'm not going to force the chat tonight. We've talked a lot. We're coming up on an hour and a half. There's a lot of other things to get to, Matthew. I was a little bit frazzled to start tonight, so we didn't even get to half the stuff that I had, believe it or not. I had to
Number one priority for the next episode is figuring out how to get your headphones to work on the first try.
Yes, I know. Well, yeah, I won't explain it. No one cares anyways. They just make it work. So, all right, I think we're good. I just like 5 minutes ago, I started I fast forwarded to a couple of months, Costa Rica. I can't wait, man. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome.
Live show from Costa Rica.
We'll do a show. I don't care. We'll do a show from there. Why not? I'll have to pick a day where maybe I'm drying out in that week, where I just take a day off, but get some good golf. Season will be over. Come back and we'll go hard at the draft because that's late April, early May for me. All right, I think that is it. So I just want to say this. I was bummed out today. Just kind of completely off topic, but before we go, a friend of mine from high school. I wasn't great friends with him. I'm 48 years old, classmate. We were in all the same classes. A lot of our AP class and stuff. He was a different guy. He was a great guy. He passed away today. Actually passed away yesterday. Left 2 young kids, and it just bummed me out today. So peace and love to the family of Michael Hilty. And he had Hilty Tree Service. Funniest thing, I didn't see him in 15 years. I called him up to do some tree work here on my property. Walks up, my driver's like, "Kris Baker, I heard you were dead." That's what he said to me. And I was like, well, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. But that's just, it's kind of, we picked up where we were left off again. But I wanted to give a shout out to him. A great guy, like one of the just coolest, nicest human beings you ever meet. Sad, cancer sucks. So I want to give a shout out to his family, peace and love to the Hilty family. Michael was awesome. And I'll end on that. For Matthew Fairburn at The Athletic, for the production crew putting in OT out in front of my house, I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you again very soon.